Hey class, I know I just left you a couple of hours ago, or actually 2 hours ago. I wanted to talk with you about the article that you read. I know a lot of you were sort of wondering what the argument was or confused by maybe how we structured everything. So I thought it might be a good idea for us to look at this article together. And I'm not necessarily going to tell you what the argument is because some of you might be thinking that through, but I do want you to see how I read when I'm reading something argumentative. So we start with by overwhelming majorities, Americans would prefer to elect the president by direct popular vote, not filtered through the antiquated mechanism of the Electoral College. They understand on a gut level the basic fairness of awarding the nation's highest office on the same basis as every other elected office to the person who gets the most votes. So for me, what was interesting about this intro is that the author or the editorial board starts off by talking about what other people think. And so I thought that was just an interesting move. Instead of saying what he thinks, he's telling us what other people think, and then saying other people acknowledge that voting someone in based on popularity is fair. Uh, for whatever reason, that was striking to me. I think in other articles that we are going to read, the author sort of says, this is how I feel. So, what does it mean if an author is saying other people feel this way as well? One possibility, and then this will be the last sort of time that I point you to a claim. One possibility is what he's implying here is if everyone believes the Electoral College is unfair, then we should get rid of it. So, one thing to note is sometimes the claims of an argument are not stated outright. You have to figure out what the claims are by looking at the kind of evidence given. So, here, this intro is a type of evidence. It's testimony from a large group of people, these overwhelming majorities. And why is he giving us this testimony? Well, perhaps to prove that everyone believes that the Electoral College is unfair or antiquated. All right. Then we go to, but for now, the presidency is still decided by 538 electors, and on Monday, despite much talk, these electors will block Donald Trump from the White House. A majority did as expected and cast their ballots for him, a result Congress will ratify next month. And so for me, I just noticed this is a bunch of observations, right? He's stating that the presidency is decided by this. This is true. Monday, they will try to block Donald Trump, or Monday they tried to block Donald Trump, but instead the House majority did, or the electors did as expected and voted for Trump. Okay. So again, these are just observations. And I'm going to skip through some of this because I don't want to keep you on a 500-minute video. Then we go to, and so for the second time in 16 years, the candidate who lost the popular vote has won the presidency. Unlike 2000, it wasn't even close. Hillary Clinton beat Mr. Trump by more than 2.8 million votes, or 2.1% of the electorate. That's a wider margin than 10 winning candidates enjoyed, and the biggest deficit for an incoming president since the 19th century. So this evidence is really just historical information, right? The fact that this has happened before. And then it's also presenting statistics telling me that the margin in which Hillary won the popular vote is wider than the last 10 candidates since the 19th century. And I mean, that's kind of jarring. But it's important to note that this is evidence. This is not a claim. This is evidence. That means it's just data, right? It's I would say logos. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what is this logos? What is this history trying to prove? Or what does it prove? Why is this author telling us this information? And if the answer to that question is debatable, then it's possible you've reached another claim. Okay. Yes, Mr. Trump won under the rules, but the rules should change so that a presidential election reflects the will of Americans and promotes a more participatory democracy. Here is where I feel like we have our first debatable statement. And I feel like this might be close to what the entire piece is arguing, but you'll figure out what you feel the whole piece is arguing. But it's debatable, right? Because it's this first time that the editorial board puts themselves in this paper or in this article and says, this is how we feel. This is what we're trying to convince you of. Okay, and then we go to the Electoral College, which is written into the Constitution, is more than just a vestige of the founding era. It is a living symbol of America's original sin. When slavery was the law of the land, a direct popular vote would have disadvantaged the southern states with their large, disenfranchised populations. Counting those men and women as 3/5 of a white person, as the Constitution originally did, gave the slave states more electoral votes. In other words, when slavery was legal, it did not help southern states to have popular votes decide the winner of the presidential election because they did not have as many legal voters. And so what happened is, because when they're counting people and they realize that slaves count as 3/5 of a white person, they had a lesser population and therefore they were allocated a larger amount of electoral votes. Now, having said all that, it's quite possible that's still confusing to you. So what I would like you to understand here is this piece of information is historical evidence, right? This evidence is based in history, is talking to us about the origin of the Electoral College. So my question to you is, why is this author talking about the origin of the Electoral College? What is he trying to prove by connecting the Electoral College to slavery? That's a question I want you to consider. Okay. Today, the college, which allocates electors based on each state's representation in Congress, tips the scale in favor of smaller states. A Wyoming resident's vote counts 3.6 times as much as a Californian's, and because almost all states use a winner-take-all system, the election ends up being fought in just a dozen or so battleground states, leaving tens of millions of Americans on the sidelines. So these are all observations, right? It's true that Wyoming's vote does count for this much more than a Californian's. It's true that this is what the Electoral College is determined by now. So these are all observations. Again, what are these observations trying to prove? That can possibly be the next claim. There is an elegant solution. The Constitution establishes the existence of electors, but leaves it up to states to tell them how to vote. 11 states and the District of Columbia, representing 165 votes, electoral votes, have already passed legislation to have their electors vote for the winner of the national popular vote. The agreement, known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, would take effect once states representing a majority of electoral votes, currently 270, signed on. This would ensure that the national popular vote winner would become president. So for me, what's important to recognize is he's proposing a solution that has partially already been implemented. The solution is, if we have electors, fine, but we want to make sure that these electors only vote for the person who has already won the popular vote. This isn't necessarily a piece of evidence, although there is evidence sort of braided in here if you see that they're reflecting on something that is currently implemented. I would say, though, that this is a claim, right? The beginning is presenting a claim, the claim being we should have our electors vote for the president who got the popular vote, or vote for the candidate who got the popular vote, sorry. So that would be a claim that's explicitly stated. It's a solution, right? Sometimes claims can be solutions. I'm going to skip over this part and just go here. The system as it is now the system as it now operates does a terrible job of representing the nation's demographic and geographic diversity. This also feels debatable, and therefore I also think it's a claim. Almost 138 million Americans went to the polls this year, but Mr. Trump secured his Electoral College victory thanks to fewer than 80,000 votes across 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This is data. Again, this is evidence. But what is this evidence trying to prove? You have to figure that out. So I think I'll skip through and just leave where I think you need to begin. And that is asking yourself, what is this whole article trying to convince me of? I know it's something to do with the Electoral College. I just need to figure out what. And what are the reasons he gives to support this argument? Sometimes the reasons can transform into claims. Now, if you're finding that that's not working for you, then what I think you could do is work backwards and look at all the different pieces of evidence that we noted, right? Or that you noted, and ask yourself, what is this evidence proving? Why did he give this evidence? Right? And possibly the answer to that question will get you to the claim. Either way, it's important that you understand the relationship the evidence has in figuring out both the argument and the claim, because the argument is not going to be told to you. They're not going to say, hey, Mimi, hey, Anita, this is what I'm trying to argue. You have to sort of figure it out like a detective by looking at the evidence and looking at keywords that are repeated. Another thing, because I know Anwara mentioned that finding the argument is really hard for her sometimes. Another thing you can do is annotate each paragraph. So read this paragraph and right next to it put the purpose. The purpose of this paragraph is to tell me what other people feel about the Electoral College. Then the next paragraph. The purpose of this paragraph is to tell me that recently the electors voted for Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton, and so on and so on. And then based on your annotations, you might come closer to figuring out what the argument is. All right. Hopefully this helped. Please let me know if there's something more you would have liked included in this little video. I'm going to try my best to submit one maybe once every other week. Last semester, folks tended to like it. This semester, I'm not so sure. You'll let me know. Have a wonderful week, and I will be looking at your Google Docs later tonight, possibly tomorrow morning, and giving you individual feedback there. See you Saturday.